the creatures vanish. They also discover a sexual aspect of the stimulation of the pineal gland, which the movie plays on. While the incident shocks them, it also alters their brain.
Stimulation causes an accompanying sexual stimulation.
As Catherine wants to go back to the machine and see more, behaving like a maniac herself. When everyone sleeps that night, Catherine does go back and switches on the machine. But thankfully, Crawford and Bubba both wake up on time and notice that something's wrong. They go into the basement to shut down the source of power, but encounter a giant worm-like monster with razor-sharp teeth. They ultimately manage to defeat it and shut off the power. All of the worms and creatures, and even violence, is visual effects created. The production
and Pretorius, played by Ted Sorrell, have invented a machine called the resonator, which allows them to see into a parallel dimension inhabited by otherworldly beings. This dimension overlaps our own, and these creatures are all around us all the time, though normally they're invisible and intangible. The effect goes both ways though, and when the machine is turned on, the creatures can see us too. The resonator works by stimulating the pineal gland, granting a sixth sense to everyone within its area of effect, with the added side effect of making them incredibly horny and super into BDSM. Still with me? Okay, so Pretorius is sucked into the worm dimension, where he gains the ability to control his body on a cellular level, and he uses this power to become made of goo, rip his face off, and eventually turn into a giant penis monster. This is to him the ultimate sensual pleasure. To be a penis monster and read people's minds. That's his thing. Crawford is arrested for Pretorius' murder, and presumed to be a paranoid schizophrenic based on the events he described. And this movie has like a 19th century view of mental illness. It's super fucked up. Luckily for Crawford, he's released into the custody of Dr. Catherine McMichaels, who believes his ridiculous story because after giving him a CAT scan, it turns out his pineal gland is all sorts of fucked up. But here's what's weird about Dr. McMichaels is she's a pretty lady, but she's wearing glasses. Huh, that's unusual. So she brings him back to the mansion where the resonator is, along with a cop sent to keep an eye on things named Bubba, played by Ken Foree from Dawn of the Dead. Dr. McMichaels gets addicted to the resonator's whole vibe, and everyone else is like, yo hey, he keeps letting monsters out, so how about we don't fuck with the resonator anymore? But she's like, nah, it feels super good. This lets loose a giant monster that chomps up Tillinghast's head. Catherine does what anyone would do in that situation, and puts a bunch of fetish gear on and tries to seduce Bubba, who is not having it. But first, she takes her glasses off. So now, you know that she's good looking, because she took off her glasses. Because before, when she had her glasses on, you wouldn't be able to tell that Barbara Crampton is good looking. Anyway, the machine turns itself back on and releases a swarm of flies which kill Bubba. Catherine and Crawford barely escape with their lives, and also, repeated resonator exposure turns Crawford into a monster man whose pineal gland is now a prehensile penis coming out of his forehead, which he uses to sense the presence of human brains, because now he's got to eat human brains for some reason. How's it going? You following the story? Following the story okay? Okay, we're almost done. So then, Dr. Block, a stern and by-the-book medical doctor whose whole thing is that she doesn't approve of Catherine's medical ethics, forces Catherine into unnecessary electroshock therapy for vengeance. Meanwhile, Crawford is running loose and eating a bunch of brains he found in the hospital's pathology lab. Because right next to, I guess, the surgery area where they were trying to pull his pineal gland worm out of his forehead, that's where they keep the infected brains or whatever. So what he does then is he grabs Dr. Block's brain through her eye socket and gobbles that up. Dr. Block, by the way, was played by Stuart Gordon's wife, Carolyn Purdy Gordon. Hey honey, I got a great role for you this time. You're a Nurse Ratched type and you get your eyeball bitten off by the guy who played Wei-Yun on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Catherine and Crawford both independently escape from the hospital and go back to the mansion, and Catherine wants to destroy the resonator now. She's not addicted to it anymore because she saw that it turned Crawford into a monster man. But Crawford is... his motivation in this part of the movie, he's in love with Catherine, so what he does is, I think he's going to eat her brain, because he's in love with her. Anyway, in a climactic final battle with Pretorius, Crawford is fangoriously devoured. But in the world of From Beyond, if you're vored by a monster, that allows you to become one with that monster. So now, Pretorius and Tillinghast are having a gloopy puppet skeleton fight. Catherine blows up the resonator and leaves, but the whole thing has driven her mad. The end. There is a lot not to like about From Beyond. There's a lot of unnecessary sexual violence, and to be clear, literally any amount would have been unnecessary in the penis forehead movie. Its treatment of mental illness, schizophrenia in particular, is deeply disrespectful and mean-spirited, though when I'm looking for sensitivity, I don't go to the director of Castle Freak. The characters are a little thin and their motivations are a little underdeveloped, but you know, all the main actors are horror icons for a reason. You're not gonna get a bad performance from Jeffrey Combs. It is literally impossible. No one could do that. Barbara Crampton is also really good, which is great because she has to wear a lot of hats in this movie. She's authoritative and abrasive as a psychiatric expert with unusual methods, vulnerable when she's under attack from monsters. I do not wish to discuss the scenes where she becomes a horn dog, or how they make me feel, and she's genuinely frightening, acting as someone driven mad by trauma. But overall, if you know anything about me, you know that this is the type of movie I like to watch. The gonzo plot, the charmingly dated special effects, the incredible creature design and puppetry, it's comfort food. It's the type of movie I could watch all day. I can hear you in the comments, Matt, shut up, no one cares about any of this. How wet are the puppets? Tell us, how wet are these puppets, folks? This one's one for the Wet Puppet Hall of Fame, let me tell you. The sheer variety, quality, and wetness of the puppets is only matched by Brian Yuzna's criminally underappreciated Society. Yuzna, by the way, was a longtime collaborator of Stuart Gordon's and produced From Beyond. The joy of science fiction cinema is seeing new ideas you'd never before considered represented on the big screen. And From Beyond is the only movie where you're likely to see Barbara Crampton, who once posed for a Playboy centerfold with a bunch of Ghoulies puppets because she is literally the coolest human being to ever live, bite off the prehensile penis growing out of the reanimator's forehead. Early in the movie, Dr. Pretorius, who I think is named after the character in Bride of Frankenstein, but I couldn't find any confirmation of that, but just know, if you're watching this Stuart Gordon, rest in peace, I did pick up on it. I noticed that. I know stuff about movies. Anyway, Dr. Pretorius claims that he wants to see more than any man has ever seen before. And folks, the biting of the forehead penis, that's something nobody's seen before, right? That's something. If you're looking for an uncomfortably horny psychedelic puppet nightmare, you're me. You are me. I'm the only one looking for that. But if you think it sounds interesting anyway, check out From Beyond.
We move on to From Beyond, and immediately I was really excited because, you know, she in Reanimator, she's the sexy college co-ed. But in From Beyond, she is a sophisticated doctor woman.
She's a brilliant psychologist, and she's very young. They call her like the Girl Wonder or something.
Right. And so I said, oh, great, a step up for Barbara Crampton. Never mind.
It's got everything you could ever want in a movie. We got goopy rubber monsters, we got kinky sex,
yep,
and we got brains being sucked out through eye sockets. It's just the best.
All of these things happen like very far apart from each other too.
And there's so much in between.
This movie, what a joy to watch. Tap into a segment of the human brain that lets them see things normally unseen.
Other planes of existence, which exist around us all the time, but we don't see them, and they can't see us. Unless you turn on this device called the resonator.
Yes.
Dr. Pretorius is his name, that he invented. And you turn that thing on, everything turns purple, and you see little space worms.
Much like Reanimator, the thing I love about this movie is there is no mystery as far as whether or not the device works. Because that's like a clear way a modern horror movie would do this story, is like, does the machine really work or is he crazy? Nope, here's a goopy worm, it just bit Jeffrey Combs in the face. Done.
Yes. The opening scene, the pre-credit scene for this movie, that's the entirety of the H.P. Lovecraft story.
Yeah.
That's it. Like the rest of the movie, they've had to make up because it was just based on this short story.
Right. And it's so H.P. Lovecraft. It's just the unseen horror.
Yes, yeah.
Something doing?
Jeffrey Combs is accused of murdering Dr. Pretorius.
It ate him bit off his head. Like a gingerbread man.
And in order to figure out what happened, Barbara Crampton convinces the police to release Jeffrey Combs into her custody, but Bubba is there for police protection.
So we got our three characters in a house. They turn on the resonator again.
Yep.
You sure we're ready for this?
Yes.
Goopy monsters come through again, and everyone loses their mind. That's the movie, basically.
It's a wonderful setup.
There's not as much story as Reanimator.
Yeah.
Because you got, the personal character dynamics in Reanimator, and this one's a little lighter on that, but it makes up for it with weirdness.
What are you gonna do to me?
I'm going to kiss you.
One of the side effects of turning on the resonator is it stimulates the pineal gland in your brain, which is a real thing.
Yeah.
And apparently when that's stimulated, it makes you super horny. Jeffrey Combs goes too far with his pineal gland to the point where he can't contain it in his head anymore, and it bursts out like a skinny dick.
I think Stuart Gordon has some repressed sexual issues. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. Because, there's that weird sex scene in Reanimator. And you go, and a part of you wants to say that might be a little exploitative, that might be a little, just for shock value. But then the kinky horror sex is a main subplot.
Sure.
Of From Behind. You go, oh, that's just Stuart Gordon.
This guy was into some weird shit.
As much as Reanimator hinges on Jeffrey Combs' performance, I think this movie hinges on Barbara Crampton's. Mm-hmm. She is given a lot to do in this movie.
Yes.
She starts out as a brilliant, kind of uppity psychologist, and then she becomes sort of a mad scientist almost. And then she's a sex-obsessed dominatrix. She gets electroshock therapy. She loses her mind. Whole range of things to do in this film.
Yeah.
They try to like desexify her at the beginning by giving her gigantic glasses and like baggy clothes,
big shoulder pads.
But it doesn't work.
It's like Rachel Lee Cook and She's All That. Like, put on all the dumpy overalls you want. We know.
Touch me, if it pleases you.
So going along with like Stuart Gordon themes, naked dude butts, great.
If you ever saw Dawn of the Dead and said, I want to see that guy in a wet Speedo, here you go.
You're welcome. But I guess like it's also like very telling of the director. He's just very open.
Yeah.
With body stuff. He's just like, he sleeps in his Speedo and now he's in a wet Speedo. That's fine. Mr. Hair tank top over there. It's honestly more disturbing than the Goop monsters. He's naked. There's sexual themes. There's that whole like sex part after Jeffrey Combs was like burnt by giant worm stomach acid.
It burns his hair off, yeah.
Well, and he has like chemical burns all over his body. And then Barbara Crampton decides to be a sex dominatrix. And
well, the Dr. Pretorius, he was doing kinky stuff in that house, as we learned from some VHS tapes. So he has dominatrix outfits just laying around his bedroom.
Yeah.
And Barbara Crampton has now been exposed to the resonator. It's affected her brain, and she's into it. And so she this time, because in the last movie she was being sexually assaulted by a severed head. This time, Barbara Crampton's doing the sexual assaulting. Tables have turned.
Is that female empowerment, or is sexual assault always bad? Like,
Yes.
Questions.
Yes.
What the hell are you doing?
Dan Kane in Reanimator, he's the everyman, he's the normal guy, he's the voice of reason that just kind of gets caught up in this crazy world. And then Ken Foree is kind of that in this one. Ken Foree, though, unfortunately, does not survive the film. He gets turned into a little skeleton goop thing. Spoilers.
His little puppet skeleton and his goopy belly. I loved it. That was gorgeous. That was gorgeous.
I saw you die.
No, not die. Just pass beyond.
Dr. Pretorius, he is, at the beginning of the movie, he essentially dies in our world, but he's sort of transcended to this other plane of existence, and that's where he just is now.
Yeah.
It's just the body, but my mind is indivisible. Bodies change.
So yeah, they turn on the resonator, and he keeps coming back. And
They just become obsessed with this world that they can't see, and so they keep going back and back, and every time it's harder. Ken Foree really appropriately compares it to a drug addict.
Don't you understand? This is the greatest discovery since Van Leeuwenhoek first looked through a microscope and saw an amoeba.
Yeah, but he wasn't down there with the amoebas.
And every time we go back, going to that perfect ramp of Reanimator, this is that same kind of cartoon mentality where the Roadrunner keeps doing crazier and crazier stuff. Every time they come back, Dr. Pretorius is a little bit goopier.
Kiss, my dear.
And yeah, he turns into a cricket monster a little bit.
Humans are such easy prey.
that's when it borders on the come on type effects of Reanimator, when in Reanimator when Dr. Hill's holding his head and it's like, this looks terrible. There's a little bit of that when he becomes the big cricket monster, where it's like, it's clearly a dummy head, but then they cut to the close-up and the camera is conveniently cutting him off at the chin. Like, gee, how did they do this?
Yeah, he's like a pretzel monster.
But overall, the effects are a million times better than they were in Reanimator. All the creatures, they go down into the basement, and that giant worm monster that eats Jeffrey Combs' hair is amazing, because it's practical. It's just this gigantic puppet, and you can tell that. CG is a wonderful tool, but if there was a giant CG worm monster in the basement and it was flailing around, it would not have that same, you believe this. It's not real, but you still kind of believe it.
Sure. Well, there's interactions with a tangible physical world that a real prop can do.
Yeah.
So, they're in a basement that is now filled with water with a giant worm. When that worm slaps around, you can see the water spray. People react to it realistically. When you see, a man's junk in a wet Speedo slap around, you know that there's junk in there.
Oh, I see. I thought that was a special effect. Ken Foree's crotch, I thought that was a prosthetic. Pineal gland has now exited. It becomes so strong and powerful that his head cannot contain it anymore. And it's controlling him, and it's giving him a desire to eat brains.
They leave the house, there's a whole hospital sequence, and he has a tiny skinny dick on his forehead, Jay. There were rails I didn't even know existed. The movie knew exactly what it was doing, but I did not.
Well, that's all you can hope for from a movie, is it'll take you to places you were not expecting. I do want to point out, near the beginning of the movie, when Barbara Crampton first goes to see Jeffrey Combs in the mental ward or wherever he's at, the hospital, and she's going down this hallway, and she's looking in the various rooms, and there's crazy people in all the rooms. She looks in one room, and there's this dude just jerking off that looks back at her.
Yeah.
Very eerily similar to a scene from Silence of the Lambs.
Look at the blood! Gotcha!
Is Jonathan Demme paying homage to From Beyond? It's very, very similar.
That was a really clever sequence in this, because later it's Barbara Crampton's theory that all people with schizophrenia, or some people with schizophrenia, might have an overactive pineal gland.
Right. They may be seeing these other worlds that we don't see.
Right, and they can't interact with them, and it drives them crazy. And so you see a lot of great setup, because you have people talking about oh, the monsters, there's so many of them in here, and you have someone who's hypersexual, you have crazy people, And then later, when we know it's all real, they show those same symptoms. There's monsters everywhere, they're hypersexual, and I thought that was incredibly clever.
Yeah, those guys are just, they're making B movies unapologetically, but they're just a little bit smarter than you would expect.
If there's a statistical correlation between schizophrenia and an enlarged pineal, why, they may be seeing or feeling what we saw. Their minds may be influenced by those creatures.
Well, how about the hard-on I got? Is there a statistical correlation for that, too?
And the great thing is, you're not even thinking about the fact that 90% of this movie is all taking place in the same house set. Because the visuals are so, you get distracted, where you're like,
No, well, not when you have goop monsters.
Exactly.
Ever-evolving goop monsters. Just bodies are gross.
That's the real takeaway, and that's, David Cronenberg is sort of the king of body horror, but I think Stuart Gordon, he's got a leg up too, as far as just really letting you know how disgusting the human body can be.
So then, famously, Stuart Gordon went on to write Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Well, of course. I mean, I'm sure Disney saw From Beyond and was like, we got to get that guy.